FoxNews.com and our continuing coverage of the Democratic National Convention in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I'm Monica Crowley. Thank you so much for being with us today. Joining me now is Jillian Melchior. She is the political editor of Peach Street, and I want to get the rest of your introduction right. You're also a fellow with the Independent Women's Forum and the Steamboat Institute.
That's correct.
Welcome, Jillian.
Thank you.
Previously, you were with National Review, and I'm a big fan of your work.
Oh, thank you.
So welcome. Let's talk a little bit about the Black Lives Matter movement. They are here in force in Philadelphia, confronting a lot of Democrats, a lot of delegates. There's a massive media coverage of the movement, obviously.
Absolutely.
You have been out on the streets over the last couple of days during the convention. Tell us a little bit of what you've seen.
Yeah, so I was out yesterday. They did a protest against the police, and the tone of it was very hostile. I mean, they were yelling "F the police." They were yelling that they wanted white journalists to go to the back, black journalists to come to the front. They were basically trying to segregate the crowd by race, and the tone was very aggressive. And so it was just sad to watch, because I think nationally we're in such a bad place with race relations. It's not a good thing to have divisive, hostile rhetoric like this. It's not the time to divide. It's the time to pull together, and that's the opposite of what they were doing.
So you were in the middle of this protest, and so you saw this happening.
Yeah, I was catching it on my camera, and you can actually go to my Twitter, Jillian, Kaym, and see what was going on. I mean, there were protesters carrying signs saying, "Blue lives ain't real," that violent systems meet violent ends, and then there were ones that really hurt my heart, saying America was never great.
Right. You know, we've seen some footage on Fox News, and some other networks carry the footage of particularly the African-American woman asking the white journalist to move to the back, which is reminiscent of the 1960s in a different context with blacks in that period of time. And it just seems so outrageous to me.
Yeah.
And I think to most Americans taking a look at this, the police, how did they deal with this particular demonstration? Did they back off? Were they aggressively trying to keep the peace?
No, I mean, they showed a lot of restraint while I was there. They were there on bicycles. It was probably 97-degree heat. They're biking along with the crowd. And I mean, the protesters were really antagonizing them, yelling at them, saying that they were pigs, saying that they were going to take it to the street with the police. And the police, I thought, were very respectful. You've got to imagine some of them, African-American police officers standing there. I wanted to talk to them. They couldn't talk on the record. But I think the Philadelphia police force has been, overall, this convention, very restrained. As of Monday night, they've made no arrests. I was seeing 4 yesterday, but that's it. They've committed to not using pepper spray. They've been issuing citations, a lot of deregulation, and I think that's certainly diffusing the situation. On the other hand, police that I've spoken to, as well as the state representative who represents 2,500 police, was saying that they're extremely frustrated. They feel like, particularly last night, the Democratic National Convention is embracing Black Lives Matter.
Yes.
And they were insulted that no families of slain police officers were invited to speak when you had the mothers of, Trayvon Martin up there. It's several people up there representing that side of the story. They felt that was unnecessarily divisive, and that makes it more difficult for them to police this week.
You know, I was in the arena last night, and I watched all of the primetime speakers, and right before they brought on the mothers of Trayvon Martin and Eric Garner and some others on the stage, they had a white police chief approach the podium, and he spoke about race relations in community, policing and community relations between police and minority communities. I noticed that the hall was quiet, and they were respectful in the hall, but people seemed to be distracted. They were on their phones. They weren't quite listening to this police chief. And then, of course, the mothers came on stage, and it was a powerful moment.
It was an incredibly emotional
moment. But I know a lot of people are saying that was a powerful moment, but it also would have been very powerful to have police widows on the stage, or children of police officers who died in the line of duty. The fact that the Democratic Party either didn't even think in that direction or thought about it and decided not to do it is striking.
Yeah, absolutely. The police union actually came out, the Philadelphia Police Union, last week and said, "Shame on you, DNC. You're making this very difficult for us." They feel like only one side of the story is being told in this context, and you can certainly see why. I mean, I was glad to have those speakers on stage last night. I think they brought something to the national conversation. Just the palpable grief was an incredible thing to hear. But we need to hear it from the other side, too, particularly in the context of Dallas. Those are the things that unite a country, and unfortunately what I'm seeing with the way that the Democratic National Convention has handled race relations is divisive, and it's just a lost opportunity.
You've been, as we mentioned, in the middle of all of these protests over the last few days. Can you tell us a little bit about if there is an intersection between the Black Lives Matter movement and the Bernie Sanders supporters? Are they one and the same? Are they different? Are they working together?
A lot of them are one and the same. I saw a lot of people wearing a Black Lives Matter button on one shoulder and a Bernie Sanders sticker on the other. But what was really interesting yesterday was hearing the frustration with the Democratic Party. Particularly in a city like Philadelphia, a lot of the protesters were emphasizing when I interviewed them that this is about local issues. And they feel that the democratic system in Philadelphia and nationwide has let them down, let black communities down. They were saying that they pay a lot of lip service to them. But in reality, it's nothing that's changing the way that they live, the problems that they face. And I think that anger with the Democratic Party is something I haven't seen before covering these conventions.
That's a really interesting dynamic that's happening. I've been saying now for a long time that there are major cross currents happening across the Western world. You saw it with the Brexit vote. You see it here in the U.S. with the rise of Bernie Sanders, the rise of Donald Trump on the other side. And nobody quite has a handle on this yet. And what you're describing is really what's percolating up on the left, I think, where there's enormous frustration ideologically and pragmatically with the Democratic Party with these far left elements. So the question is, where do they go? Will they, in the end, turn around and vote for Hillary Clinton? Will they vote for Jill Stein, who's the Green Party candidate? Will they vote for the Libertarian, Gary Johnson? Will they vote for Donald Trump? Or will they just stay home? What's your sense?
My sense is that in cities like Philadelphia in particular, they're probably going to go with Hillary Clinton nationally, stick that Democratic thing. I think there is, though, opportunity to change, particularly on a local level, because there is frustration. I mean, if you look at Philadelphia, this is a city where we have had decades of corrupt Democratic rule, where there is a literal party establishment that's had a lockdown on everything from labor to community policing. And that is what they're upset about. That's something that impacts their daily lives. Talking today, my Uber driver was a black woman who's from inside Philadelphia. And she was talking about gentrification, but the thing that upset her was that there were subsidies going to developers and not subsidies going to the community. And so that was a tax issue, that was an economic issue that I think she certainly came down on the conservative side of. So I think there's a chance on many of these things to make the case, particularly to the black community, that Democrats have failed them, that this kind of corruption isn't working.
And it's interesting, Donald Trump's speech last week, his acceptance speech at the RNC, addressed African Americans and the failures of Democrats over many decades to address these issues and improve the lives of the black community. And certainly over the last 8 years, ironically with their first black president, that things now economically for the black community are far worse today than they were when Barack Obama became president. And I think that's a real opening for conservatives to make the pro-growth message really resonate in that community. And Donald Trump is trying. I got to give him credit. He's trying.
But he's also, I don't think that message is necessarily going to sell, because you have to look at his past too. And I think the African American community is looking at, for example, the Department of Justice suit that was brought against his company back in the 1970s, systematically racially discriminating against black apartment applicants. I think those things hit closer to home, and it's made his job of convincing them much more difficult.
So what's your sense? Do these voters go for one of the other sort of secondary candidates? Do they vote for Donald Trump, or do they just stay home?
I think they
What's your gut feeling?
My gut feeling is they'll stay home or vote for Hillary Clinton.
Because
I don't think they're going to get on the Trump train.
They're so upset with both major choices that they just won't vote.
They're saying that the system is rigged, that both parties have let them down, and that they don't feel like they have a voice. That's really tragic right now, because there's a huge political opening. No one's taking advantage of it, and these are people who are slipping through the cracks in many aspects.
We just have about a minute left. What's your sense about the Black Lives Matter movement in terms of how they view the president? Do they feel supported by the president? Do they feel abandoned by the president?
I think they feel disappointed. One thing that I've heard covering this over the past couple of years, race relations, is that black communities feel that Barack Obama has done more for the civil rights of the gays than for black communities. I think, we were told when he was coming in that this was a landmark, that this was, it was going to be the thing that definitely changed. And I think we've seen race relations get much worse. I think you see profound disappointment.
Yeah, and I've often said that the one thing that a black president can do in ways that a white president cannot is address the black community and all the issues there, and this president has not done that. In fact, I think he's made it worse. Jillian Melchior, great to see you. Thank you so much for joining us. Jillian Melchior, she's the political editor with Heat Street. She's also a fellow with the Independent Women's Forum and the Steamboat Institute. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Monica for continuing coverage of the DNC.